Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. Hope you all are safe and sound. First of all, a very happy Eid Mubarak to all my dear students. May Allah flood your life with happiness on this occasion, your heart with love, your soul with spiritual, your mind with wisdom. Wishing you a very, very happy Eid. May the divine blessings of Allah bring you hope, faith, and joy on Eid al-Adha and forever. And I welcome you all to the lecture 11 of Intermediate English class second year. And now we are back to our routine and our learning session. So if you could recall, my dear students, your previous lecture, so we have discussed about Unit 2, Reading Selection 2.1. That was a speech by Martin Luther King Jr., I Have a Dream. So we have discussed about the historical background plus the figure of speech, rhetorical devices, and rest of the things in our previous lecture. And today we are going into the reading of the chapter. And one thing I want from all of you is your keen attention towards whatever I say to you people. And one more thing, that you all should open your books in front of you, and in your book, that is page number 41, Reading Selection 2.1, I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, so before going into the reading, a very short review I would say, because we have already discussed about the details of the historical background of the speech. So who has delivered this speech, or who is the writer? It is King Martin Luther Jr. Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Date was August 28, 1963, the day when he delivered this speech. Location was Washington DC, America. And the genre, the type of his writing is a speech. And what was basically the purpose of his speech, or you can say the topic on which he talked about, was March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom 1963. In his iconic speech at the Lincoln Memorial for the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, King urged America to make real the promises of democracy. You should keep in your mind this very phrase, promises of democracy. King synthesized portions of his earlier speeches to capture both the necessity for change and the potential for hope in American society. Okay, so this was basically the purpose of his speech. That was basically hidden in the words, in the lines of whatever he said in front of 250,000 supporters on Lincoln Memorial in Washington DC in 1963. Okay, my dear students, moving towards the reading of the chapter. 50 years ago. Now, score is basically 20. When we say 50 years ago, it means that 100 years ago. And when he says 50 years ago, here he basically referring to the Gettysburg Address of Abraham Lincoln. Okay, dear girls, before going into the details of the chapter, I would like to tell you one thing, that you should keep in your mind, that whatever has been written in front of you, or whatever has been written in your book, the meaning of the lines, the meaning of the words that are hidden, you have to identify them. Now here he does not want to say that 100 years ago, rather he is referring to, here he is alluding to, he has used rhetoric, he alludes to Gettysburg Address of Abraham Lincoln. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. A great American means Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln was an American statesman and a lawyer, and he was 16th president of USA from 1861 to 1865. In whose symbolic shadow? Here, symbolic shadow is a metaphor, and this metaphor means that the lives have been greatly affected by the beliefs and deeds. When we say symbolic shadow, here he has used as a metaphor. This very phrase he has used as a metaphor, but this phrase means that the lives of the Negroes have been greatly affected by the belief and deed. Now, the belief and deeds of whom? Of the great American, Abraham Lincoln. And particularly he is talking about the signing of Emancipation Proclamation of the great American, of that great American. So 100 years ago, a great American, Abraham Lincoln, signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and today we are standing, we the Negroes, we are standing in his symbolic shadow. We are here greatly affected, greatly influenced by his beliefs and his deeds. Now, what was Emancipation Proclamation? Very attentively you have to listen, dear girls. Emancipation Proclamation was basically a presidential proclamation and executive order issued by United States President Abraham Lincoln on September 22, 1862. It was the time period of Civil War. And Abraham Lincoln, he issued Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863, as the nation approached its third year of bloody civil war. So, Abraham Lincoln issued the orders of Emancipation Proclamation in September 1862, and then he issued the Emancipation Proclamation in January 1863, when it was the time period of civil war. And what this proclamation declared, what was the declaration of this very proclamation? So the declaration of the proclamation was that all the persons held as slaves. Now when he says slaves, it means that he's talking about the Negroes, the black Americans, within the rebellious states are and henceforward shall be free. So the Negroes, they should set free. Americans, black Americans, they should set free. So Martin Luther King, at the very start of his speech, he refers to the Emancipation Proclamation signed by the great American, the 16th President of America, Abraham Lincoln, and he says that under his beliefs, under his deeds, we all are standing. We all are believing on his beliefs and deeds. We all are the great, you can say we all show a great agreement on his proclamation that he has declared. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. Beacon light of hope is a metaphor over here. Seared in the flames of withering injustice is again a metaphor. Now, what does he want to say over here? Momentous decree means whatever has been legally bind, it is of great significance. Whatever he has said, it was of great significance. And this momentous decree, that binding, that order, that you can say the bond, it came as a great beacon light of hope, beacon light of Hope means that a strong light, something holds the promise of hope. Fine. So he says that it came as a great hope. It came as a great light of hope for the millions of the Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. Seared means something that is fried so quickly, and withering injustice means devastating injustice. Like this momentous decree, this Emancipation Proclamation came as a great light of hope for the millions of Negro slaves who had been fried, who had been seared in the flames of injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. The long night of captivity is again a metaphor over here. He is basically here directly what we can say directly comparing the nights, the sleepless nights, the you can say the oppressed nights of the Negroes. So he says that this day, this proclamation came as a joyous daybreak, means a sunrise, break of a dawn. So it came as a sunrise, it came as a bright day, and it ended the long night of their captivity, the long night of Negroes' captivity, the long night of Negroes, Negroes oppressed night. So, but 100 years later, 100 years later, we must face the tragic fact that the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. Manacles of segregation and chains of discrimination is a personification over here. What he wants to say is that 100 years has been passed and still the Negroes are not free. Negroes are still in the handcuffs of this separation. They are still in the chains of discrimination. They are still discriminated. They are still not treated equal. They are still not given their rights, their privileges, and their basic human rights even. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty. Is again a metaphor and is a very beautiful metaphor. He wants to say that the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity, is again a metaphor. So when he says on a lonely island of poverty, means where black they live, and midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity means where white people lived. So they are deprived, they are discriminated, they are not treated well, they are the victims of oppression, they are the victims of rude behaviors, they are the victim, they are crippled in the hands by the handcuffs of this separation, blacks and whites. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society. Corners of American society is again a metaphor, and he says that the Negroes, they have become so weak, they have lost their strength, and they have been set in a small corner of American society, and they find himself as an exile in his own land. Basically, this land, America, was the land of black Americans, but it has been snatched by their hands. Fine. So he says that 100 years has been passed, and still the Negroes, they have lost their strength, they have become so weaker, and they are thrown in a small corner of American society, and they feel themselves that they are in exile in his own land. So we have come here today to dramatize an appalling condition. Appalling means a horrifying condition. We came over here in order to recall somebody, in order to awake the people that they have some, we also have some rights and some privileges. If I go back, if you could see on your screens that King synthesized portion of his earlier speeches to capture both the necessity for change and the potential for hope in American society. And one thing that I wanted you people to keep in your mind, that was make real the promises of democracy. Now King said that we have come over here to dramatize, to make you people realize, to make you people aware, to make you people awake of the promises that you have kept, the promises of democracy, that this state is by the people, for the people, and of the people. So they all are over here in order to make them realize the promise of democracy. Okay, in a sense, we have come to our nation's capital, where he was delivering this speech, that was Washington, D.C., to cash a check. Now this cash a check is another metaphor, and this metaphor means African American in the march to Washington, D.C., they came over here in order to get the rights the government owes them. Fine. So US has promised something to African Americans, and they have come to get what US has promised to give them. So when somebody promises you to give, when somebody has to give you something, one promise you that one day I would give you this very thing. So now that is the reason he has used over here that we have received a check of what? The promise of democracy, the hope of equal and equal society with full of justice. So we all have come over here to the nation's capital, to Washington, D.C., to cash a check, the check of democracy and the check of equal rights. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. Okay, the architects of our republic, metaphorically he is saying, he is referring to the ones who has set the Constitution, who has wrote the Constitution. And here he very magnificently, by using very strong words, he says that while constructing the Constitution of this great America, on the day of declaration on 4th July 1976, it was written over there. They were signing a promissory note. Signing a promissory note, metaphorically he says that they were contesting a promise. And what was that promissory note? The promissory note was that every American is equal, and they fall here means they have somebody has inherited something. Everybody has inherited this America, the rights, privileges, the equal treatments, justice, everything. So this note was a promise that all men would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. When he says life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, he basically refers to Declaration, in which it was clearly written that the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness and the rights of life, it is not transferable. It has been guaranteed, it has been promised that all men would be guaranteed the same rights and same privileges. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note. Defaulted on this promissory note is a metaphor, and he he basically compares this metaphor to their ill treatment with the African Americans insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. So they have defaulted on the basis of color. Blacks are not given their rights, no matter if they are Americans or not. They are Americans. Basically, they are the land owners. But they are not whites, they are blacks. They have been treated ill. They were the victims of injustice. They were the victims of inequality, oppression, violation of rules and laws. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, referring to that promissory note, that constitution, America has given the Negro people a bad check. Another metaphor, a bad check means ill treatment, low, you can say oppressed treatment, inequality, injustice. A check, now he is here elaborating this very phrase, a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds. If you could see, dear girls, metaphorically he is using all the words. Whatever I have said in the start of this lesson, that the things have been written on the screen, the meaning is hidden in the lines. Now when he says a bad check and insufficient, he does not want to say that I have I am in a bank, I have submitted a check, it came as insufficient funds. Rather he says that we have been promised, we have been given a check that you would be given all the equal rights and privileges living in this society, in this state, America. And we have been defaulted on this promissory note, on the note of equal rights, the distribution of equal rights, and Negro people have been given by a bad check. And when we have submitted this bad check, it came as insufficient funds. Like we have been treated zero. We have been totally neglected. We have been totally thrown in a small corner of the society. It seemed as if we are exiled. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. Bank of Justice is bankrupt. Again, metaphorically, he says that we do not believe that justice has been vanished. It has been deleted from our society. It is still there. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds. We do not believe that we have been not given. We won't be given those equal rights and privileges. Here he is basically showing his hopes. Where we are, okay. So we refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. Great vaults of opportunity, again metaphorically he says that we have lots of this nation has number of opportunities. It's not bankrupt in the sense of justice. It's not, the bank the bank has not insufficient funds. So we have come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. So their appeal was, their plead was simply freedom and security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America and the fierce urgency of now. Hallowed means a sacred spot, referring to Washington DC, the capital. And we also came over here to remind America the fierce urgency of now means the severe, ferocious pressure. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing of gradualism. Cooling off is an idiom, and tranquilizing of gradualism is a metaphor. Here he says that now there is no time to calm down. There is no time to slow our pace in order to yearn, in order to ask, in order to plead for our rights and our privileges. Now is a time to make real the promises of democracy, that this state is for the people, of the people, by the people, not only whites but blacks as well. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Dark and desolate valley of segregation is a metaphor. Sunlit path of racial justice is again a metaphor. And when he says dark and desolate valley of segregation, he is referring to the place where the black Americans they live. He says that now is the time to get ourselves out from this desolate valley, this deserted valley of separation, and go into the illuminated path of justice. Now is the time to open the doors of opportunity to all of God's children. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Quicksand of racial injustice and solid rock of brotherhood, again they are metaphor, and he wants to say over here that now is the time. Now is the time to live together. Now is the time to sit on a single dining table. The children of whites, the children of blacks, they should sit together, eat together, live together, and love one another. Now is the time to get ourselves to lift our nation from the quicksand, from this what we say in Urdu, this dal of racial injustice. Now is the time to get ourselves off from this racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. We should be together. We should stand united. Okay, one thing I wanted to mention over here in the second paragraph, please go back. There has been written right at the start of 100 years later, then again 100 years later. So this is basically anaphora that we have already discussed, that the repetition of phrases, words, or sentences in different clauses. So in a second paragraph, Martin Luther King Jr. he has used anaphora, and here he has again used this anaphora. Now is the time, now is the time, now is the time. Okay, I think it has been clear, my dear girls. Okay, moving towards the next paragraph. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment, the pressure of the moment, and to underestimate the determination of the Negro. That they should not overlook, they should not take for granted the urgency, the determination of the Negroes. They should not underestimate our what we can say over here, our power, our emotions, our you can say the pressure that we have right now. They should not take it for granted. They should not underestimate it. This sweltering summer of the Negroes' legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and inequality. Again, a very beautiful metaphor that has been linked with the weather. The metaphor, like the opening of King's speech, uses a number of metaphors, like to compare the promises of freedom made in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Emancipation Proclamation, and then the failures of these documents to basically procure those freedoms for all. He then turns to a metaphor familiar to all the weather. So here, this metaphor that he has used, it is basically related to it is familiar to the weather, or metaphor of weather. This sweltering summer of Negroes' legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. And here in this metaphor, King compares the legitimate anger of African Americans to sweltering summer heat, and freedom and equality to invigorating autumn. So when we analyze this, he compares basically the freedom and equality to invigorating autumn, and the legitimate anger of African Americans to sweltering summer. So analysis, if we go into the analysis of this very metaphor, so like any one of you, or anybody else who has visited Washington DC in August, it has a keen understanding of what a sweltering summer is. Like it produces this summer produces frustration, suffering, restlessness, and longing for relief. So the hundreds of thousands in like attendance would have clearly understood the implications of need for relief. So they all were like in dire need of this relief. The Negroes I'm talking about, the African Americans I'm talking about. So they were in dire need of this very relief, this rest, the end of that suffering, that frustrations. So that relief that began to arrive with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So that is the reason he says that in 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Beginning of what? Beginning of the end of this frustration, the end of this restlessness, this sufferings, and the start of the relief. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. Business as usual and blow off is an idiom, and it means that so blow off steam means that to vent or to talk or to take actions, especially in a ranting or unrestrained way, or in order to relieve the stress when you take some actions. So he says that Negroes needed to blow off steam, means they needed to take actions in order to relieve the stress that they are feeling right now, and will now be content, will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. Business as usual means that an ongoing and unchanging state of affairs despite of any difficulties or any disturbances. So there will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. Here he, if you could see hidden in the lines, he basically threatening the white Americans. He's saying them that Negroes will not step back. They will not go back. They will not return to their homes until and unless they would not given their rights. The whirlwinds of revolt, metaphorically he says, will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. Shake the foundations means metaphor, is a metaphor. Bright day of justice is again a metaphor, and the whirlwinds of revolt. Whirlwinds of revolt, metaphorically he says that our anger, the oppression, the depression, the stress, the anger, the aggression of the Negroes will shake the foundations, will shake the whole setup of this nation till the day of justice. Until and unless the justice will not emerge from the nation, from this nation of America, the Negroes will definitely shake the foundations of this nation from their whirlwinds, from their revolts. But there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm thresholds. Stand on the warm threshold is a metaphor, and it means that they are standing on the oppression. So in above in previous paragraph, when he says the whirlwinds of revolt, he basically here compares what the civil rights movement will produce, because this was the civil rights movement that he has started. With 250,000 supporters, he has started a civil rights movement for the sake of their, like, in the demand of their rights. So he says that civil rights movement, this whirlwind of revolt he compares with the civil rights movement, will produce, if their demands are not met, to a rapidly rotating, destructive, vertical column of air. If you could see this whirlwind, it moves in rotation. So he compared the day when these rights are produced to a bright day of justice. So, whereas King's first weather metaphor involves the natural progression of events, summer to fall, his second weather metaphor involves violence and destruction, and an inevitable end to the violence and destruction. Basically, Martin Luther King Jr., like it must be noted, is not promoting violence over here. Rather, he is summarizing the feelings of frustration that have enveloped the throngs of minorities to whom the like he has mentioned promises of the Declaration of Independence and other American documents had not been fulfilled. So he is not basically promoting violence over here. He is not basically threatening somebody. Rather, he is just trying to summarizing, making others realize that they are oppressed. And that is the reason King uses weather metaphor in order to emphasize the reality of the movement, that it is a force that cannot be controlled, that must manifest itself through the acquisition of equal rights and privileges. So basically, the thing I wanted to make you clear right over here was, he was not promoting that violence. Rather, he was promoting, he was trying to realize the oppressors, that they are oppressed. But there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm thresholds, who are standing on the wheels of oppression, which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness, a bitterness and hatred. A very beautiful metaphor he has used over here. He compares freedom to a thirst quenching draught and hatred to a cup of bitterness. King's understanding of the plight of African Americans in the 1960s gave him the ability to shape the civil rights movements. This was basically the understanding that he has developed. He undoubtedly understood that the potential for the movement to turn violent, having himself suffered racial injustice, King, better than most, understood how easily hatred and bitterness could engulf the entire movement, making the seekers of justice as unjust as the oppressors. So he very, if you could feel the emotions in his words, that strong powerful words that he has used, that let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom, that quenching drought, thirst quenching drought, we are yearning for that freedom. We would not drink from the cup of bitterness and hatred. You should present in front of us that freedom with love, with justice, with prosperity, with unity, but not with hatred, not with bitterness. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. So he is not in the favor of violence, rather in the favor of unity and prosperity. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. We should not be violent. We should not go into the violence and oppression and ill treatment. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. Tied up is an idiom. It means that we all are together. We have been created together. We have been destined together. And their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. Metaphorically, he says that we are bound together. We are nothing with nothing apart from we are nothing without whites, and whites are nothing without black. We cannot walk alone. So with his word, it has been clear that he does not want a separate state. Basically, Negroes, they do not want a separate state. They do not want a state where they are separated from whites. They want a state where they all should sit together, eat together, live together happily, with prosperity, with their struggles should be together, their quest should be together, their if you could see that we must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence again and again. We must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. He basically compares facing the struggle for equality with dignity and discipline to entrenching oneself on the high plane and the meeting of physical force with the soul force to rising to majestic heights. Like King basically stayed true to his core principles of peace and love. He is here advertising his mindset towards peace and love, notwithstanding the violence and hatred he confronted. He urged his followers to do the same. These majestic heights King desired could only be achieved through love, through peace, through prosperity, not with hatred, not with murders, not with killings, not with bloodshed. As we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall march ahead. Pledge means to make a solemn promise. We should promise one another that we all are together. We are not separate. We cannot turn back. These are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? It is a rhetorical question. Rhetorical question is basically those questions that pose for a thought. So here he is posing a thought in front of people. When will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied. This question has been posed on the in front of the devotees of civil rights. Devotees means the admirers. This question has been posed in front of them, and their answer is, we can never be satisfied as long as the Negroes is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality, police cruelty. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of highways and the hotels of cities. Why he has used this very sentence? Because they were even not allowed to go into the public places. They were not even allowed to use the public washrooms. They were even not allowed to go into the hotels and motels. They have to travel long hours, and they were not allowed to rest on their way. I cannot say anything. That can you people feel that pain that these words contain? That pain, that suffering, that yearning, that longing for freedom and equality. They want to be free. They want to be set free. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. Ghetto is a densely populated slum area of a city where socially and economically deprived minority people live. He refers to that ghetto. He says that we won't be satisfied until and unless we would be shifted to a smaller ghetto to a large one. We can never be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote. A Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. Mississippi is a state of US and New York as well. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters. A very beautiful simile. Rolls down like waters, indirect comparison. And righteousness like a mighty stream. Again a simile. So he says that we are not satisfied until and unless we won't get this justice, that freedom, that equality, that togetherness. We won't be satisfied until. So that was all for today, my dear girls, because it would be difficult for you to comprehend all the not difficult, I would say, but it would become somehow it would become a confusing for you. So definitely it is continued, and inshallah in our next lecture we would end this chapter. So till then, your home task is, you have to search for that, why is the speech I have a dream and iconic, why the speech has been termed as, it has been given this title, an iconic speech. You have to search for it. And that was all for today. Please do repeat whatever we have studied today, and all your queries, all your confusions, they are welcome on our WhatsApp group. And a very blessed and good day to all of you till our next lecture. And thank you so very much, girls. Allah Hafiz.